Hi there, it's Sean McGeever, and I am here to do one of the Talk Tuesdays. It's been a little while. I'm doing my best to keep up, but I hope you're having a great day. It's tomorrow's Easter, so we have a lot to look forward to. So I'm going to try to sneak this in here. What we're looking at this week is Luke 14, and Luke 14 is a great chapter. And it has a couple parts in it that could work well in a club talk. There's probably three parts that could work well. The first part is in the beginning. It talks about Jesus healing a man on the Sabbath who had dropsy. And then the second part is Jesus' discussion beginning in verse 15 about a great banquet and invitation that goes out. And a third story could be the cost of discipleship. That actually comes right after that. So you could go in some different directions. Probably the most straightforward Young Life talk would be Jesus healing a man on the Sabbath. And that would probably be the easiest and most straightforward. I've already done a Talk Tuesday on a very similar story that is actually just one chapter 4 in Luke 13. So you can look for that if you're interested in more about that. But I'm not going to go into that now since I already kind of covered something like that. Instead, I'm going to go into actually the next two sections about the great banquet where there's an invitation for those to come, and then the cost of discipleship. And as I've thought actually quite a bit about this and talked with some friends about this, with Jorge and Lisa and Joel and a bunch of friends who do Young Life Talks a lot, I'm actually going to do them together. That's what I'm going to recommend. And I think this could be a great one. It's a lot about the invitation to follow Jesus and the call of what that really means, what we're getting ourselves into. A lot of times in Young Life, we might wait until the end of a semester or the end of a camp week to say, hey, do you want to decide to follow Jesus? But we should note, this comes in Luke 14. This is like in the midst of Jesus's ministry. He does not wait. And I just want to pass on to you that we do not need to wait to invite people to follow Jesus Christ. We can invite them to follow Jesus Christ at any point. If anyone tells you otherwise, just read the Gospels. Jesus always asked people to follow him. Didn't have to follow a certain progression. So anyway, I think you could do that here. And when you do that, I think when you start in verse 16 and just kind of highlight all the way up through verse 33, I think you might just touch on a couple points. Here are the points that I would highlight, and I have a couple verses that I have my outline that you can look at later. But first off, there's two main points. There's an invitation to a banquet with Jesus, and it's basically for those who want to be with Jesus. There will always be people who do not want to respond to Jesus. And Jesus knows that full well, but the invitation goes out and is accepted by those who want to be with Jesus. In fact, in the story there's all these excuses that people give, that they need to work in the field, or they need to work with their animals, or they need to be with their family. Those aren't necessarily bad things, but what we'll see is that Jesus wants to make sure that those things have their right place and not the primary place in our lives. Anyway, so there is this updated invitation, and it goes out to those who are poor and overlooked and hurting and sick. And that is just right at the core, not only of those who Jesus is wanting to invite, but also for probably who those are more probable to receive and want his gift. If your life is going perfect, it's difficult to want to follow Jesus, especially when we get to part 2, where it talks about the challenges that will come with it. And so I will go to the second part, which is the conditions, which are the conditions of discipleship. It's about those who are willing to make Jesus first. And Jesus highlights 3 things. First off, that people are to become second in our allegiance to Jesus. I'll talk more about that in a moment. That also difficulties are going to come and should be expected if you're going to follow Jesus. And third, similar to that, is that there's that we should all have count the personal cost of what following Jesus would be. So anyway, there's a lot about everyone is invited, recognizing that not everyone's going to respond, especially those who think everything's going great, but everyone's invited. But if you're going to respond, consider these things. A new allegiance to follow Jesus above any other person in your life, expecting difficulties and knowing beforehand that you're going to be getting into that. And I think that it's important for us in Young Life, Wyldlife, wherever, to not water down these requirements, to not make it sound like it's going to be easy. Because if anyone out there has been following Jesus, you know that it is not easy. And so Jesus isn't our homeboy or buddy. He is a God who is jealous for us and does not want to share us with anyone else. He does not want to take second place in our life to anything or anyone in our lives. So I think we should be honest about that. Otherwise, kids could say, yeah, I want to do that. That sounds great. You know, just like all the other things in my life, it'll fit in. No, Jesus demands to be the ultimate thing in our lives. Anyway, here's a couple main points. One could be just emphasize that Jesus invites everyone. So there could be a big emphasis on those who maybe feel like they're left out or something like that, because certainly Jesus has that emphasis in this story here. Another main point would be that Jesus knows that those who love their lives, maybe you think everything's going perfect, you might have a difficult time accepting Jesus right now because you don't think you need him now. That might be the emphasis. You might not need him now. Well, there will be a day, and it might be very soon, or it could even be now too, depending on what God's doing in your life, that you recognize that you need Jesus just as much as anyone. Another main point is that following Jesus will be difficult, but really, is there anything truly worthwhile or truly amazing that comes easily? Probably some of the most amazing things that God has given you in your life have come through a lot of challenges and difficulties, and that's what has made them even richer for you. Fourth point, and I think you just put it out there, do you want to follow Jesus right now? Give them the invitation. You never know what God might be doing in that crowd or whoever you're speaking with. But when you want to invite people to that, say, I really want you to know what this means. Jesus makes it really clear, and I want to tell you about that. So just give people the invitation and break it down. Now, what does this show us about Jesus? Here's a couple things. Jesus does not want to exclude anyone in his invitation. Especially, God's heart is for those who are on the fringes of society, who are overlooked, and who are being minimized. And so I think just saying, if you are really kind of feeling like you're on the edge of your school or your friend group, or you feel like you just don't fit in, I really, really want you to hear this. You are invited. A special invitation goes from Jesus Christ, the God of the universe, to you. He loves you and wants to step into your life. Speak to that crowd at all times. Also, that this shows us something that shows us about Jesus is that Jesus really wants to think through the personal cost of making a decision to follow him. We should not make this really lightly. We shouldn't just say, oh, it's just an extra part, but really, really think through it. Now, what does this have to do with our lives? We should probably be honest that a lot of us have excuses about why we don't want to follow Jesus. You could list them. You could list the ones that maybe you've had in your own life. You could list some that you've heard from friends. But we all have excuses why we don't want to follow Jesus. Another thing that this has to do with our lives is that people kind of generally like their lives, who like their lives are self-sufficient, and they might not realize that they need Jesus. And just kind of as an aside, for those of us in leadership, don't be surprised if a lot of people whose lives are going really great the gospel seems to fall on deaf ears. I mean, only God and the Holy Spirit can make anyone respond. But I would say don't be disappointed if you tell them really what God's asking for. And if you have a crowd of people that, to be honest, for all practical matters, it seems like on the outside at least, we never know what's going on the inside, but it seems like things are going great. Just keep preaching the gospel. God will work in his time, and if people don't respond, especially if people are very happy in that moment, just trust God's timing. Keep telling them the gospel. You never know when that will come around. Another thing, what does this have to do with our lives? People who are overlooked, poor, hurting, or sick realize that Jesus will be probably more eager to know Jesus' love for them and respond to the invitation. Last thing is that responding to Jesus comes at a cost. Sure, grace is a gift and it's free. Faith is a gift and it's free. At the same time, Jesus wants us to know what we're getting into. This isn't me just trying to make it into some workspace thing or whatever. It's Jesus's straightforward teaching on this topic. Jesus wants us to know what we're getting into if we're going to follow him. Similarly, we have parallels like this in society. If you've been to a wedding, you are saying yes to that person that you say yes to in a wedding, which means that you're saying no. And you're saying no to a whole bunch of other things, other people's, other opportunities, etc., etc. That's just how a relationship works. A couple technical details. Actually, I won't go into all of them, but a lot of people, especially when I'm in campaigners or something, they'll ask about verse 26, which says, if anyone comes after me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, even, yes, his own life. This kind of do I really have to hate my parents? And what's going on there is the word hate is being used as a bit of a hyperbole to make sure that it's catching our attention. And so it doesn't really mean exactly to hate. Now I hate you. What it is it's trying to draw a contrast, a comparison of where our primary allegiance is. So if you go, my primary allegiance, my primary dedication is to maybe my parents or my best friends or even myself, Jesus is saying, by comparison, I want to be first above all of those things. So much so that maybe it kind of almost feels like, geez, almost like you hate them. Now, that's not what it means exactly. It doesn't mean hate. It just means by comparison, there should be a significant difference about our response and our love for God compared to maybe the people that actually on earth that we love the most. So actually I wrote this, maybe this will be more clear. By comparison, this change might mean hate, but it also can mean that we actually love our father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, or self more. We actually love all of those people more, possibly through God's help. But by comparison, we love God even more than that. So just one way to look at it. I think hate, when framed the right way, is less about hate, but it's more about the comparison. Anyway, I'm going to move on. In verse 26, when it talks about being a disciple, this just means people who follow Jesus and who identify with Jesus' mission and purpose. The last or two bits would be when it talks about bearing his cross or her cross, verse 27, that we need to do this. This is actually like a present tense. It's not once like what Jesus did on the cross. It's a present tense that I'm going to continue to bear my cross. And anyone who's been following Jesus knows that just responding to Jesus obviously is a huge hurdle, a huge thing that we have to do in our life. But it goes on and on and on. It's a present tense of bearing our cross in an ongoing way. And then the last bit of technical stuff, and then I'll do illustration, which is that we're called to renounce all that we have. Other synonyms might be to bid farewell or to leave behind or abandon everything that we have in order to follow Jesus. So two illustrations, and then I'll wrap it up. One illustration you could use would just be to have like an invitation. I have this invitation here for Chris and Ivy for their wedding coming up. I'll respond eventually, I promise, or I hope, May 7th. Anyway, but just an invitation. You could say, I don't know if you received an invitation before to an event, to a wedding, something like that, but Jesus has an invitation for you, and what is your response? You could have an invitation up there. If you wanted to be so bold, you could give them an invitation, maybe list that main points of your talk and say, hey, I really want you to think about this. You are invited. What's your response? Another one could be just a ring. Maybe you have a ring, or maybe you have a wedding ring. Maybe somebody in your club or someone who hosts your club. You could say, hey, do you have a wedding ring? And just use a ring. Say, hey, this symbol here has been maybe for a lot of us is kind of a difficult one. Maybe we have not seen great examples of this. But let me say kind of what this is meant to mean is a commitment, where we are saying that we are going to make a commitment to one person, and in doing so, other people we might love a lot, but not how we're going to love this one person. They're going to stand out in a way that everyone knows this is the love of my life and no one else comes close to them. And in doing so, saying yes to this person means saying no to a whole bunch of other things, or just saying you come second to a lot of things. So anyway, hopefully something there is helpful. And I hope that you might put together your own great club talk as God leads you. Thanks a lot. Happy Easter. Bye.